name for coding. All right, thank you. Maybe we should have done that from the start. Good. He's gonna lead a conversation around coding, and he has flagged here machine learning with tidy models. So on this call, ideally, he's gonna bring a code, and he's gonna show how the code works. And that's gonna be a way for us to either debug a code that is not working well, or it's gonna be a showcase of some codes he created that other people can use. And this is really what we want to do. We want to improve our group's reproducibility, our group's documentation, so that other people can use similar things that we're learning, but also use this time as a study session. And then here I have Sid marked to present on March 12th on writing, where he's going to come and write up how to do a first draft of introduction when the topic's relatively new to you. Cool. So it's going to give some guidance on writing. So all of this will work in this session. Sometimes we're going to do writing and it's going to be a discussion on how to write about a particular method section for a given method we've been studying. Ideally, what we want to do is when Nathan talks about linkage, then at another point, he can come and talk about the codes he's been using to do some linkage because he's developing that code and that analysis. And then at a later moment, he can come and talk about how he's writing up the methods for it so that we can all reuse this and we can all learn from that, okay? So it goes without saying that if you don't flag your names here to do something, then we're not gonna have things to discuss. And in the end, Nathan, João Vitor, myself, we're going to end up having to name ourselves for several of this, and that will increase our burden and potentially our interest of continuing the calls, of course. So it's a group work. It's supposed for it, and the way it works is that you share what you're learning and your knowledge to the group, and then the group will share your learning and your knowledge with you, and then this way the group grows, okay? So that's good. All right. That's an introduction to it. Does anybody have any questions so far? No? All right. Well enough. So with that, any other housekeeping or just intro things, Nathan, that we want to share before we get going?
No?
Good morning, all right, everyone. Good.
I just want to thank you for all for being here.
Cool. Yeah. And of course, if you don't want to present or just want to come in and listen, please feel free to do that as well. So as we get started, the other thing that I want to do is I want to record these sessions. If anybody doesn't want to be on a recording, this is a good time for you to say goodbye. If you're fine being in a recording, we want to record the sessions and keep it later so that we don't have to teach the same things many times. We can reteach them later when we have more things to update on the topic. But overall, this will be good resources for the group overall. So with that, no further long, Nathan, go ahead, guide us through.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, again. Thank you all for being here today to hear me talk about nerd stuff. Really appreciate that. So what we're trying to do with those data science calls is to be a cool moment for increased learning and share experiences. And I'm gonna share my screen here. Let me see if I can do this right. Yes, I'm gonna share the whole screen, so it's not gonna be a problem. Okay, everyone can see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions in the middle of the presentation. That's completely okay. That's how I picture it to be. So really a discussion. If you have anything, any comment that you want to do, or just a question, feel free to reach me, and then I'm gonna stop and then answer it if I know the answer. If I don't, then we're gonna look at it together. So as João said, I'm really deeping into health data linkage since it's my doctorate project. The base of my doctorate project is health data linkage with two big data sets of the Brazilian health system. And when we thought about doing this health linkage, this data linkage, I started to research more about how to do that, because it's not easy to really understand and to do those linkages. It's not as easy when you have like multiple data sets for a project that comes from a group that you've done follow-ups, and you have like a unique ID that you're gonna just merge one into another. And there's more to that, especially when you don't have those unique IDs and you don't have a standard procedure on how to collect and how to fill in those data in the system. So I'm going to talk about how to do those procedures for this health data linkage. So first of all, what is data linkage? Data linkage is any procedure that allows integration between two or more data sets, and it can be defined as the method of combining data of a same person that is present in different data sets. So a data linkage, it will be combining two or more data sets so it can give me more information about a same person that is present in different data sets. So in this case, I have here this figure where I have information of the yellow system and information on the red system, combining them to create information on the orange system. So this is important because it allows us to have more information about that person and the health needs and their health issues, or even their lives, because sometimes we have a lot of missing data. Yes, João.
You said we can stop you, so I'm gonna do that
Yeah,
frequently. Do you
please.
say we can? No, it applies to other types of data, just not individual data, right?
Yes,
So I can link municipality data. I can link files data. So not necessarily just on the same person, right?
yes, not only necessarily person. It can be whatever information you have about the same thing, I guess. So you can have like health facilities that have multiple procedures done, that you can link that those health facilities, those procedures done in the health facility. You can link municipality data, you can link country data, you can link whatever data you have. And you can also link a data set to itself. So if you go like doing an exam and you have done multiple exams, it will be in the same data set because it's an exam data set. So you can link it to itself, and it will have multiple entries for you or for someone else. So you can combine data sets with itself or more than one. So this
Yeah,
is a
let's go.
method of
So
combining
let's
data.
change. Yeah, let's change person for entity then. It can be any sort of entity, right?
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yes.
good.
Person to entity.
Yes.
Let's see if I can do that. Entity. Not sure if
And
that's
look
how
at
it's
you.
right spelled, but I tried. Okay,
Perfect.
perfect. Thank you. So this is the basic data linkage idea. So you combine data of a same entity. So how can I, wait. How can I,
Did you
If
click
you
on
did that on Zoom,
annotate?
yeah.
You need
yeah,
to stop
you have to
annotating before
delete.
moving.
Yeah, I need to learn a few. This is new to me. I've never
You're
done
a
this.
fast learner, you just did it.
Okay, so why using data linkage? It's a low-cost procedure that can be done in different softwares, and it allows a bigger view, a wider view. So as we're gonna scale up multiple data, it will give us more information, and it will give us a bigger view, a wider view of the problem or of the information that we're trying to link. So with that, we can create more insights. We can really see the picture differently from another point of view. So considering that it allows a bigger view, is a low-cost procedure, it's always really useful to do those data linkages. Okay. And why not using data linkage? And this is not actually, it's just like some heads up, some warnings, because there's no why not using data linkage, but you should be careful. Why? Sometimes it requires information to be perfect when using some approaches like the deterministic approach that I'm going to talk about later. Sometimes it requires too much computational memory and usage. So our computers may not be able to handle the amount of information that we're trying to do this linkage. So sometimes it will cause some really heavy damage to your computer. So be careful when trying to do that. And there's always a risk of data leakage because we need to use sometimes and most of the time personal data. So names, information about date of birth, or any other personal information that cannot be leaked. So we're gonna...
One that I love that's very used in Brazil is mother's name.
Mother's name. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We use that a lot.
Yeah.
So that's another type of data that can be leaked. So name, date of birth, mother's name. Go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, so a question with this first one, is this kind of getting at the potential for false matches? Like we might think we're matching somebody to their own identifier, we're linking them, but we're actually linking someone who is similar on only
Yes.
part of the criteria, perhaps?
Exactly. So John Smith linking to another John Smith. How you know it's the same person? John Smith is just Smith. It's most of the most common names in English. So you cannot know for sure that it's the same only using name. So it can be sometimes hard to identify those perfect matches. So sometimes it requires information to be perfect. Yeah, so like João Souza. João Souza is a great example. And in fact, you're gonna see that later. So yeah, the risk of data leakage is important because it requires us to have personal data, and we need to be careful of who is watching this and who is seeing those data, because we're gonna share information about HIV and AIDS, violence, behaviors, alcohol use, substance use. So we need to be sure that we have all the ethical procedures done to make sure that we're not doing any unethical procedure here. So it's actually not a why not, it's just like warns that sometimes it required us to look at it really carefully. So when we're talking about linkage, we need to talk about the types of linkage that we have. And we have a deterministic approach and a probabilistic approach. A deterministic approach requires a perfect match. And that's the only use for the deterministic approach, because you have a unique ID and it will be perfectly matched. Otherwise, it's not very useful to have a deterministic one, because you're gonna lose matches. That's for sure. Because the data sets are not filled perfectly. We are the ones that are gonna type into those data. So we're gonna be filling those systems, and we make mistakes. So we need to make sure that it's perfect, and we cannot have this certain. So the deterministic approach requires a perfect match, usually with a unique ID. So if you have a unique ID, then you're gonna be good. If you don't, then probably the deterministic approach is not the best one. Then you go for the probabilistic approach that can be made without a unique ID. You can use the name, the date of birth, the mother's name, and multiple other variables to link those data, and useful for data collected by different people in different settings or different periods of time, that sometimes you cannot track the past collected data. But this one is hard to reproduce. It requires more computational memory, but it can identify matches even without a unique ID or typos, errors in the string that we're trying to link. So the probabilistic approach is probably the best one for us to use when there is no unique ID. But if you have a unique ID, then it eases the job. So deterministic linkage, when should I use it? Only when the data has a unique ID variable. And the idea unique ID should not be a serial number, like 0001 to 100, because that's not useful. It should be a complex structure of number and or characters, because if you're using a serial number, like as enrollment, so this is the first person that will be enrolled, and this is the second, this is the third. Sometimes what happens is that you can lose track of that enrollment. And sometimes if you're collecting multiple times, like follow-ups in a cohort, for example, you may have like IDs for that data set and IDs for the whole project. And those will be different. And that's not useful, because sometimes you're gonna need to be careful on which variable you're linking, and they're gonna be the same, but they're not. So it should be a complex structure of number and or characters. For data sets linked to the government or the public available, it can be like the social security number or unique ID for the health system, like we have in Brazil. We have some data sets that we're gonna use the CPF, there's our like unique ID for the person. Or you can use the most common one, there is the national health card number. So it's unique ID only for the health system. But if you don't have this need to government or public availability data sets, you can use other types of unique IDs. And if you're going to do that for cohorts of multiple follow-ups, it's better to use code that contains information about the person. And what I mean by this is like this. So sometimes when you have like numbers, only numbers, serial numbers, it's easy to lose track of it. And then you're gonna try to match two different data sets. And then you're gonna need to check the age, you're gonna need to check the sex, you're gonna need to check any other information to make sure it's the same person, because we're not sure if those variables are the same. And with this approach, you can have a more easy way to make sure that it's the same person. So you create a combination, a complex thing, that a complex code that will allow you to have information that is not going to be easy to lose track of. So this is a, I think it's 11 numbers here that you have. The first two being year of enrollment, the third and the fourth number, the group of enrollment. Then you have the code for sex that can be 02 for female, 01 for male, or whatever. and then the last 2 digits of birth year, and then a serial number. This is a complex way for you to do it, but it's also easy. So it allows us to have information about the patient without we actually knowing anything about the patient, and making sure that it's the same patient across the data sets. So that's how we use that, for example, in Social Security number. I did some research on the Social Security number for here in the United States, and it's a 9-digit code that you have. The 3 first numbers is for the area code, and then the next 2 is for group code, and then the last 4 is a serial number. And it's the same for the Brazilian CPF. So you have 11 digits where you have the state, you have a serial number, and you have a code of where it was done. So this is an approach that really works really well and allow us to not lose track of who is this person. So, sorry, I was just watching the chat here like quickly. Yeah. So this is one of the basic usages of a unique ID and how you should construct it, how you should make this up. It can be, it should not be that short, so it lost all the sense. So only 4 numbers is not that really useful, but it shouldn't be that long because the risk of errors increases. So the average number should be between 9 and 15. More than that, too long. Less than that, not useful. Here I wrote some R functions for deterministic linkage that it's usually for using the dplyr or tidy models package, tidy table package. So you have left join, inner join, full join, anti-join, and you have merge that is like R base. So the left join is useful when you try to combine some information that is present in dataset 2 into the dataset 1. So you don't need every information dataset 2, just those that are combined. The inner join is when you need the intersection, so only those that are present in both datasets. The full join is when you want to have information about everyone, including those that are in the intersection. And the anti-join is when you want just one of the data sets and not those that intersect. So if I'm trying to exclude people that died for some reason, because I need to do follow-ups, and I can do follow-ups for people that died, I want that removed from my data set. So I do an anti-join. So this is a better approach than merge. Merge is a R-based function that allows us to do deterministic linkage, but it's not as useful as those 4 functions because if you have a unique ID, then you have only one variable, but sometimes you don't have a unique ID, there is only one variable. You have multiple variables that you need to use, and merge is not going to be useful. And I'm going to bring this into a coding session probably later on the year. So the deterministic linkage is useful when you have this unique ID, but we have some problems with it. So here I have the same person 4 times and a number of matches of 0. Why? Anyone has a guess?
The accents.
Characters present in the name.
Yes, so I have João Vitor P. Souza without any signs or anything like that, and with a Z, as it should. And this one, Souza, is spelled with an S. So they're different, and they're not gonna be a match. This one is with a Z, but it has what we call in Portuguese the tio. So it's not going to be a match. And this one will not be a match to this one because the I here has an accent. So they're all the same person with some minor differences. But in the deterministic linkage, this will give me 0 matches. So this is when we cannot use the deterministic linkage because we know that it's the same person, but we cannot link that properly because there are some typos, there's some errors, and they're minors, but there exists. The deterministic linkage won't be able to track those errors and take that into account. That's when we go to the probabilistic approach. So the probabilistic linkage should be used when the data set has not a unique ID variable. And even sometimes when it does have a unique ID, sometimes you can do a hybrid type of linkage where you do a deterministic linkage and then you do a probabilistic linkage for this unique ID because you know that might be some errors in that typing of the unique ID because the numbers are really close in the keyboard. So 0 to 1, it's easy to change. That's why we should use a complex ID where it's more difficult to have like an H and an 8 in the middle of something that it doesn't need. Like for sex, you only have 0, 1 or 0, 2. It shouldn't have an 8 or anything like that. But for this kind of linkage, you need personal information that will allow the linkage to be successful. So if you don't have a unique ID, you need to link with other variables, and that means personal information. We can do that without personal information, yes. Is it the most appropriate thing to do? Probably not. There's some discussion about that, because when you're doing like with anonymized data sets, you can sometimes do probabilistic linkage, linking like date of birth and the municipality and some sex, race. Sometimes it's useful, but sometimes it's not. Because like I said, you can have 2 John Smith that was born in the same day, but you cannot be sure they're the same person without doing a probabilistic linkage with their personal data. Data with poor quality and presence of typos or missing values can also benefit from the probabilistic approach. So if you know that your unique ID or any variables have a poor quality or some typos or really, really bad missing values, probabilistic approach can be a good option for do those linkages. And a warning, using only one variable is not enough for probabilistic linkage, because one variable should mean unique ID. If you're using probabilistic approach to unique ID, then it's fine. But if you're doing a probabilistic approach using one variable that is not a unique ID, then it's not going to be a probabilistic linkage. You're going to be misleading the analysis. Because if you're going to use name, John Smith is a current name, just like João Victor. So it will be the same, and it's not. So one variable is not enough. Sometimes for a good approach for the probabilistic linkage, use at minimum 3. So in Brazilian systems, we usually use the name of the patient, date of birth, and then the mother's name. Sometimes you still get some errors, but it's the best that we can do. So here is a table that it give us why we should not use only 2 variables or variables that can be misleading. For example, in the database 1, we have Maria Anjos and the date of birth that is September 27th of 1994. Go ahead, João.
So do you have literature to support that 3 is the number to use, or is there literature to guide these methods of which variables to use or how many variables to use? This is important when we're developing a methodological pipeline to have support for those decisions.
Yeah, there's some discussion about that because when you're doing a probabilistic approach, most places, most articles will say that it's important to have at least 3 because when you're using less than that, and it's probably you're misleading the analysis, the probabilistic approach.
I
But
can
there's
see the
no,
reason for using at least 3. Yeah.
yeah,
The main question is, do you have can you, along with your presentation, can you link a paper that would help
yeah.
guide this? Or whenever you're writing up the method, let's make sure we have a paper to cite.
Yeah. There's a lot of, most of them are, the most papers that I've saw doing this is Brazilian ones because we do that a lot in Brazil. So
Yeah.
they're in Portuguese, but most of them suggest, even the Ministry of Health suggests using at least 3. But yeah, I can definitely put some
Yeah, and
papers
even
to
if you
that.
don't, even if you haven't seen it yet, it's definitely an area we want to have some guidance.
Yeah.
Cool.
So here is from the paper that I left the link on the spreadsheet. And they did this table to illustrate how to get those matches. And they only used the patient name and the date of birth. The name of the mother is to illustrate why you should not use less than 3. So the patient name is Maria Anjos, and the date of birth is September 27th, 1994. And in the dataset 1, you have these 4 entries, and in the dataset 2, you have those 4. Using only the patient name and the date of birth, you'll see that this one and this one are the same. This one and this one are also the same. But when you go to the name of the mother, they are different. So they're match, but one of them is true positive and the other one is false positive. The same thing goes for those 2. So here the name is the same, but the date of birth is different. So it's not matched. N is a true positive. But here you have different date of births, but because of a typo. Because here you have 1994 and here you have 1894. And it's going to be a non-match, but it's a false positive because when you look at the name of the mother, it's the same. And this one and this one are nearly the same. And the probabilistic approach can help us to identify if they are more likely to be a typo and are the same person, or if they're not a typo and they're not the same person. Yes, João?
Yeah. So for in this case, Nathan, that you're talking about the typo on the date of birth.
Yeah.
When you do the merging, do you like set rules? Like, it's impossible to have the person to be born like a century ago, 100 years ago. Can you do that?
No. Because sometimes you're working with data that here on the date of birth, of course, it's impossible for the person to be born in 1894. But sometimes it's a data set that it's changing only from 94 to 95. So it's possible to the person being born in 95. So those approaches that you're gonna be, oh, this is not a possible year. then it should be possible somehow, but it's not the best approach because when we do a probabilistic approach, we're not going to see at if it's possible or not, but the proximity, the similarity. So because if it's not possible, then it shouldn't be on the data set. So it's definitely a typo. What we need to know that is that we already know it's a typo. We should only know if that's a typo that it matches or not. Make sense? Okay. Yes, Pamela?
Hi, I have a question. Is there any preference for numerical versus categorical variables? So for example, are typos less likely numerical or stuff like that?
Yes, great question. Usually it's more useful when you use a character type. So with numerical, it's useful for unique IDs, but when it comes to the probabilistic approach, it's harder to identify if it's really a typo or if it's not. So in this case, when you look at the date of birth here, you should get these signs, these hyphens, that's how you call it in English, these hyphens missed. But depending on the type of programming language that you're using or where your computer comes from, you get different types of numeric structures. So for example, in Brazil, we use this type of date. So it's day, then month, then year. And the United States is different. So you use month, then day, then year. And this is something that we need to look at too. So numbers, it's useful, it's very useful. But when you're looking at this probabilistic linkage, it's better when it's characters because the proximity will be best matched than numerical. But you can use numerical, it's not a problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So with this table, we can get in accuracy value of how accurate was the linkage that we did. We can do that. In fact, if you're doing like in our programming language, there are some packages that do this automatically for you. Of course, you had to set a lot of parameters like thresholds and stuff, but this is for more advanced encoding classes. So how we measure the matching, how we know there's going to be a match or not. These three are probably the best methods for the probabilistic linkage. So we have Hamming distance, Levenshtein distance, and Jadot-Winkler similarity. That some people call Jadot-Winkler distance as well. So the Hamming distance measures the minimum number of changes needed for strings to be the same. And what that means is, if I have João as typed here, how many changes I need to do to get the same as this one? So for example, to get João Vitor P. Souza as written in this one, how many changes I need to do in this string? One, because it's only the S. So the Hamming distance between those two is 1. For this one, it's also 1, because the only thing different here is the A with a 2. And for this one, it's 2, because you have the A and the I. So the Hamming distance will see these changes, but the Hamming distance only works with the exact same number of characters. So here, João Vitor has the same number of characters, is the same length of string. But if this one is missing the P, then it won't match. I can have a Hamming distance because it's only the changing number. It doesn't account for something that's deleted or included. For that, we use linkage distance. So it's an expanded version of Hamming that measures the minimum number of changes, insertions, or deletions needed for two strings to be the same. So if I need to insert 2 characters, or if I need to delete 2 characters, if I need to change two letters and include 1. So the linkage distance will do the trick. But the most useful and most used one is Zero-Winkler similarity, because it measures how close two strings are from each other, consider the number of characters, the number of common characters, the number of changes, and etc. So it gives us a probability number from 0 to 1. So it gives us how likely they are to be the same, considering a lot of parameters. And here I have a table that illustrates that. So the first person here in the data set, in the string 1, is Joana Maria da Silva, born in 11th December of 1987. And in the other data set is Joana with 2 N's, Maya da Silva with an I, with a Y. If you try to do a Hamming distance, it won't work. Why? Because there are different sizes. So the length of the string is different. I don't have the same length. So I can have a Hamming distance. And if I do a Hamming distance for the date of birth here, it will get 2 or a 0.8, because I need to change this number and this number. So I need to swap them. So it's 2 changes. If I'm doing a Levenshtein distance, I'm getting this type, this number here is a probability of their being apart from each other. Because here I have 2 N's for the same name. Here I'm missing an R, and here I'm using a Y instead of an I. So they're probably likely the same, but I can't be sure. And then this one is the same number because there need 2 changes. But when I'm computing Zero-Winkler similarity, when estimating this, I have a bigger probability, because it will take account if this other letter here in Joana's name is the same or not. So if I'm using different letters, then it's probably not the same. But here, the duplicated N is the same because it's a duplicated letter. So it's going to take into account that, well, yes, it's probably the same because it's the same letter. And then here I have Maya and Maria, and it's only missing an R. So this part of the string and this part of the string has the same characters. So they are different, but have the same characters. So I have the M, I have the A, and I have the I. And then I have the A again, and they are in the same order. I'm only missing 1 character. So they're probably the same. And the same goes for this one. I'm changing the I for a Y. So Y for a Y is probably the same thing. And here, I'm only changing those 2. It's the same numbers. I only swap it 2 of them. So this is a probabilistic linkage. They're going to give us a probability of how close, how related they are, and how's the likelihood of their being the same. So in this case, they are the same, because both the 3 of them, or both of them, because the Hamming distance is impossible to calculate for this one, said that are most likely to be the same person. So I came up with this, how can I say this? Flow chart? Is it how we call it? The flow chart?
Sure, yep.
Yeah. Omali, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, Nathan, thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah, could you take us to the previous slide, please?
Sorry,
The previous slide, please.
the previous slide. Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I was just trying to understand does the second row, is it a cumulative of the first and the second, or is this just the date of birth in determining the distances?
This one, you mean?
Yes.
This is the date of birth. Yes.
I mean, these probabilities, do they include the name, or they are just a function of the date of birth?
You can do with both. In this case, I used a Ministry of Health, the Brazilian Ministry of Health material that calculated separately for the name and then date of birth. But you can also calculate those together to have like, okay, so what's the likelihood, what's the probability of those two be the same as those two? So you can either use one of them or two of them. But as I said,
Okay.
you should not use less than three. So yeah, you can calculate two of them at the same time, but you can calculate them separately. It's not a problem.
Okay, I get you. So in this case, based on the Jaro-Wilker similarity, the date of birth was a greater determinant than the name.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I mean, based on the Jaro-Wilker similarity with a
Yeah.
probability of about 96%, the date of birth here was a greater measure of similarity than the name. Would
Yeah,
that be what that means?
this means that it's probably the same date of birth. Because, as I said, sometimes it's the same date of birth that it's in different formats, like in Brazilian format and American format. So it's telling me that considering those two and that I want to link them because I have a guess they're the same, they're telling me, yeah, they're probably the same. This number here, it's a tricky number because we don't have like a standard. You should use, you only consider like when it's perfect, one. But there's no, it depends on the quality of your data set. So if you have a lot of missing data, if you have a lot of values that you are not sure that it's gonna be a match, you can lower the cutoff limit. So for
Okay.
example, my data sets, I used 0.9 because I know that the quality of the data sets, it's bigger. But for some data sets, I usually use 80 or 70 or 60 because the cutoff will tell me the probability of those to be the same. So if I know there's probably some errors in that, I can lower the cutoff or even bigger rises the cutoff. Is that what you asked? Did I answer that?
Yeah, technically. And then what would this 0 star under Hamming distance mean for the names?
Yeah, because they're the different lengths, so they're not going to be able to compute this hammering distance.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, we're almost in time cap, but just to make sure that I present everything. So when I'm trying to do health data linkage, I need to take those two data sets and see, do the data sets have multiple entries for one person? If they do, what sometimes I want to do is a deduplication. So I delete the repeated entries for the same person because it can be a problem. So if I want to take those two data sets, I only need one entry for that person, I don't need two. So if I put two, then it can be misleading in in case of a probabilistic approach because we will get like, okay, so this one is a match and this one no. So you lose matches because it's probably compute as not linking. So what you want to do is deduplicate. So you get rid of those multiple entries for one person only. If they don't have multiple entries for one person, then you need to ask, do they share a unique ID variable? If they do, then you do the deterministic approach. And if they don't, you do probabilistic one. And of course, you can do the duplication and then go to unique ID variable. And then if you do the deterministic approach, and you can also go to a probabilistic approach after, there's no problem in that. And actually is the more useful way to do that, using a deterministic, and then to make sure that you're not missing anyone, do a probabilistic after, excluding the deterministic matches. So this is a flowchart that I kind of made up to make it easier to understand those decisions when doing health data linkage, but it's very basic. So it needs to be expanded a little bit to include all the nuances for the health data linkage. So yeah, that's what I wanted to present today. Thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Nathan, thank you. I want to make sure we have a few minutes just to go through what we're going to do next week. So if you have questions, please reach out to Nathan. Nathan, please share the paper by email as well. Not everybody will have a straightforward access to the spreadsheet. But then actually, let's make sure that on the weekly email, we share the link for this meeting and the spreadsheet and the paper, if that's possible. If not, we just do it a separate email reminder. Nathan, it would be great if you could have another moment whenever you get to that point to talk to us about strategies for validation. Because the main thing for me is it's straightforward to do the linkage, and thank you for the introduction. But then how do you assess if it was good enough, right? And I think that's the key portion of it. So thank you very much. All right, so next week we have João Vitor, who's guiding us on machine learning using tidy models, an intro to it, but you'll see codes, and ideally those are going to be codes that are templates that everybody can use going forward. So feel motivated to do something similar. All right. Okay. All right, thanks everybody.
Thank
Next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.